There's many names that we call it. The formal one being Incident 13, although some of us like to call it the Dark Giant Massacre. Me personally, I call it the genocide, even though the term isn't fitting in the definition of the word. I won't disclose the location of where the genocide happened since the cleanup is still in progress. However, although my superiors are keeping it under wraps, I feel as though the public should know. They must know the mistake we made. I won't say what we did, since I don't want anyone else to try it. Just know that we made a mistake, and some poor souls had to pay the price. In a way, posting this is an apology, albeit one that can never be accepted. Before I go, please heed my warning. Don't always ask, "Can I?" Instead, try asking, "Should I?" The following is a journal entry from a young man whose whereabouts are currently unknown. If you're reading this, chances are I'm dead. I don't know if the rest of the world is experiencing the same thing, but I pray to God they aren't. I don't have a whole lot of time or the amount of space in this journal, but I'll try my best to explain. It was the middle of the night. Me and my girlfriend were sleeping in bed together. For context, we live in an average apartment, not too big nor too small. The day before was no different than any other day before it, so there would be no indication of what me and my girlfriend, Sarah, would have to go through. When I woke up, I was drowsy from sleep. At first, I was too drowsy to hear the noise, but as I woke up enough, I heard the noise that woke me up. You're probably familiar with the Amber Alerts. Those messages that you get on your phone after a kid goes missing or is kidnapped. Well, that was the sound I was hearing. I felt the bed shift as she stirred in bed. "Turn it off. It's annoying," she said, barely awake. Reluctantly, I turned over and grabbed my phone that was on the left side lamp, and I made the noise stop. But before I put it back, I checked to see what it was about. I expected to see the standard thing, but instead, there was a long message. To the citizens of, you are advised to immediately shelter in place. Do not leave your homes, lock all your doors and windows, and stay as quiet as possible. I repeat, do not leave your homes. Do not leave your homes even if you hear people screaming or calling for help. I sat up, utterly confused. Did I just read that right? Immediately, I once again read it, this time examining every word to make sure I had read it correctly. When I had finished, I found it was exactly the same as before. My mind then tried to think of any possible explanation. Was it a prank? It had to be a prank. Because if this was real, who would make a message like that? "Hey, Sarah, wake up," I said, nudging her. "What?" She turns to me, with annoyance in her face, as I most likely woke her up again when she was just about to enter sleep. "Read this," I said, handing the phone to her. She took the phone and began to quietly read the message, and slowly her eyes began to open more as she continued. "The hell?" she muttered. She then turned and looked at me. "Is this a joke?" she asked me, a little accusingly. No. Why would I make a joke about this? Especially in the middle of the night." It was silent for several moments before she spoke once again. "So, what do we do? Do we listen to it?" I thought for several seconds before I made a decision. I'm gonna ask Phil. Maybe he didn't get one. And if he did, then we'll take it seriously. Phil was our next-door neighbor, a middle-aged man who was single and had dark brown hair. He was a Marine who currently is spending some time away from the military. Although he could be tough, he was a nice man who wanted to help people whenever possible. I got out of bed and turned the lamp on. This'll only take a second, okay? She nodded and gave me my phone. As I exited my apartment, I accidentally bumped into someone. Sorry, I was...
Alex.
A voice I immediately recognized asked. It was Phil. Phil, what are you doing out of bed? I asked.
Well, I wanted to ask you about something.
That was when I realized he had his phone in his hand. So, you got one too? He at first seemed confused at the question, but when he saw I also had my phone, he understood.
Yeah, I did.
He then raised his phone up so I could see the exact same message I'd gotten. So, what does it mean? What should we do? I said. He shrugged and said,
Either it's a prank, or it's real. And I don't know if I want to gamble on it being fake.
So we do the shelter-in-place method? I asked him. Personally, I was really betting on it being fake, since I didn't have sufficient supplies to really bunker down. Maybe some food to last a couple days, but other than that, not much. Besides, we didn't really know how long it would be if the warning was, in fact, real. To some partial relief, he shook his head.
No, we know too little of what's actually happening.
I was going to respond again, although I forget about what, but was interrupted when I felt myself shaking. Actually, I wasn't shaking. The floor beneath my feet was shaking. As a matter of fact, the whole building was trembling, and a loud roar was heard from outside. What the hell? I said, and looked around to see what could be causing it. Phil, on the other hand, wasn't scared, rather surprised.
A jet. That was a fighter jet.
A fighter jet? I said. What the hell is one of them doing out here?
I don't know, but it's definitely one of them.
As the roaring sound went away, I suddenly remembered Sarah. Sarah, you okay? I yelled as I walked back into our apartment. Now the sound of the fighter jet itself probably couldn't do anything besides make the building tremble. But it's just instinct to protect the people you love when you know something bad could be happening. But when I went inside, she was no longer in bed. Instead, she was standing by the window, looking outside. Sarah, are you okay? She didn't look at me, and then I went to the window to look outside myself. There were people in the streets, maybe hundreds of them, all going in one direction. Some were carrying luggage and backpacks, some were carrying children, some were even still in their pajamas. Some were going a steady pace, while others were running. When I saw that, I had no idea what to think. Confusion, fear, dismay. I didn't know if I was supposed to feel any of that. So many of them. Going to where? Sarah finally said. Instead of responding, I turned around and went out to the apartment again. When I went outside, Phil was still there, but there were more people in the hallway. Some of the tenants, who I assume were woken up by the sound of the jet. I looked to Phil, and without me saying anything, he made a decision.
We should leave. I saw the people in the streets. Whatever they're running from, I don't want to know.
When we left the apartment, we didn't take very much. Just our phones, a backpack with some stuff we thought we might need, and our shoes. Then we left the apartment. When we entered the street, there were even more people. But what I found intriguing was that they walked, but some looked uncertain, as though they didn't know where they were going or even why. Phil walked up to one of them, who was a young man in his 20s. Phil asked him what was going on, and the man simply looked around as if he didn't see the giant crowd of people. He looked back to Phil and shrugged.
Honestly, I couldn't tell you. I just woke up and found all these people in the street. When I asked someone, he told me to get out of the city, so that's where I'm going.
Phil thanked him, and he walked off to join back with the rest of the crowd. There was another man running down the road, and this time I stopped him.
"Hey," I began. "Do you have any idea what's going on?"
After that, I got a good look at his face, and it disturbed me. He was scared, terrified even. His face a pale white, as though all the blood had been drained. He was panting, and he looked down the street in the direction the people were coming from. His face somehow went more pale, and when I saw where he was looking, I saw nothing.
"There's death that way,"
he whispered. "I'm sorry, what?" He turned back to me, his face as pale as ever, and said something that sent chills down my spine.
"Get out, or the giants will kill you."
Before I could say anything, he had already began running again. With the three of us having a short chat, we decided it was best to travel where the group was going. As to wherever they were going was most likely safe. Looking back, it seemed like the right call, though that's probably how most of the people got on that card. You see a large group of people going in one direction, and you join them as well. I have to write faster. I think they're getting closer. We traveled down for 20 minutes, the crowd only getting bigger and bigger, which only made the movement slower. At this point, there must have been thousands in the streets. We all had to hold on to each other to make sure we wouldn't lose one another. However, soon the mood in the crowd starts to turn. First starting off as a rather calm march, the air slowly began filling with fear. One man shoved past us, knocking Sarah to the ground, not even stopping to say sorry as we continued shoving people out of the way. Soon more people like him kept popping up quickly. Some yelled as they ran, saying things like, "Hurry, go faster, they're coming."
"Get closer together,"
Phil said, as the crowd began to get more agitated. Those still confused yelled out their questions.
"Where are we going? What are you running from?"
And in response, I heard one man yell, "The giants." But even then, as we continued to walk, the crowd remained mostly calm. But that changed when we heard the noises in the distance, coming back the direction we were coming from.
"Did you hear that?"
Phil said. I did, in fact, hear it. There was a loud commotion coming from behind us. It was far away, so it must have been loud and big if we could hear it from so far away. Others heard the noise as well, as they turned their heads around and tried to stand on their toes to see what was happening, though they immediately were forced to keep moving forward. What was also noticeable was that more people began running. It was only a minute after the noise began that we were able to distinguish what it was. It was the screaming of people. Behind us, we heard shrieks, wails, yelling, cries of terror, all of it. It was at first far away, but eventually got close to the point that it was unmistakable what it was. The things that happened before got the crowd churning, but it wasn't long before the screaming got the crowd into a full panic. Soon people began shoving each other out of the way, knocking others to the ground to leave them to be trampled by the growing stampede. All the while, the screams only got closer and closer. Phil grunted and said,
"We have to get out of this crowd."
Looking around, I spotted a parked car.
"We can go on top of that to look around."
I had to yell since the screaming at this point had filled the air. The crowd now descended into full panic. We almost swam through a current of people, making sure Sarah was close behind. She was, at this point, terrified, but we didn't have time to calm her down. We finally reached the car, and Phil and I climbed on top while we told Sarah to simply stay by it. I looked in front of us, not behind like Phil did at first. I only noticed something was off when I looked at his face. It had gone pale, and his lips were almost quivering.
"Phil?"
I waved my hands in front of him, which managed to snap him back to reality, and he immediately began once again looking around. However, I couldn't fight the urge to look at what he had seen. And so I turned around and looked down the street. What I saw was something straight out of nightmares. Down the street, what looked like only 100 meters away, The crowd going along all that way only stopped at their feet. The feet of the giant. What I saw was something in the form of a person, but he was huge, standing what looked like 2 stories tall. He had pitch-black skin, even blacker than the night sky above us, and from this far away I couldn't make out any facial features, but there were 2 white dots I could only assume to be its eyes. What was worse was there was another marching right next to it, and there was another one marching beside them. I counted 6 marching along, almost as if they were taking a leisurely stroll in the park. But then, one stopped for a moment and reached down. When he brought his hand back up, I saw in absolute horror he had picked someone up from the crowd. The person was flailing their arms and kicking their legs in the air, screaming at the top of their lungs. The giant paid no attention and simply stared at the person he had in his hand for several seconds. Then the person stopped flailing, stopped doing anything, as the giant suddenly squished its hand and split the person in 2, as flesh and blood dripped through its fingers. After that, it kept marching along. It wasn't an odd one out, either, as while it had been observing its catch, the rest of its giant companions had been picking up people as well. Before I could see what they did to them, Phil finally yelled, "Over there, there's an alleyway." I looked to where he was pointing, and sure enough, there was one about 100 feet from where we were currently. Without wasting a single moment, I jumped down to where Sarah was and grabbed her by the hand. "What did you see?" she yelled. I ignored her question and began pulling her as we made our way towards the alleyway. We had to fight, shove, all sorts of things in order to move a couple of feet. We were making progress, but it was slow, too slow. The screams only got louder, and soon I was feeling the feet tremble beneath me as the steps of the giants caused the ground to shake. They were catching up to us, and by the time we were 50 feet away from the alleyway, there was a new sound of snapping and popping. What was worse was that the snapping and popping came right after one of the trembles. We were so close. And then I glanced behind us, realizing they were close enough that I was able to see them. I could make them out even more this time, but what I only focused on was their face. Their smooth, featureless face. There was nothing there, no mouth, nose, ears, or hair. The only thing there was 2 white dots. "Faster! Faster!" I shrieked. We pushed and shoved even more, and right now it pains me to know we most likely shoved people to the ground who would inevitably get trampled. 20 feet away, the shrieks were unbearable. 15 feet away, I could hear the sound of bones breaking more clearly, as well as the mush of flesh. 10 feet, a shadow slowly began to look over us. 5 feet, the shadow was unmistakably that of a giant hand. 1 foot away, I turned to the right to see the man next to me be picked right up, his wails soon to be cut off. Then we burst through the alley and exited the crowd. He stopped, all of us, panting, catching our breaths. When I looked up, it soon became apparent that others had gotten the same idea. There were maybe 15 others in the alley with us. Then I turned around back to the crowd, and the exhaustion left. There were the giants just walking along, stepping on people as they walked. A few stopped occasionally to pick up someone before violently killing them. They were creative. One took off a woman's head. One threw a man high in the air and watched him land hard on the pavement. One grabbed a young woman by the leg and slammed them against the ground, practically making them explode. We all just stood there, mesmerized by the parade in front of us. We didn't even move when one of them finally stopped and turned their heads in our direction. We only got back to our senses when it walked into the alleyway towering over us, and leaned down and picked someone up. I turned around, and to my despair, I saw the alley ended in a dead end. However, looking to the right, I saw there was a door. When I saw this, I ran up to it and tried to open it, but it was locked.
Phil, help me.
I screamed. He was next to me in a split second, and we both immediately tried to kick the door down. By now, the rest of the group in the alley had broken out of their trances as well and began screaming. I overheard someone begging,
Please, spare me, please.
It went on until I heard a gurgle and the sound of blood splattering on the floor. Finally, the door gave in, and we rushed inside. I turned around and grabbed Sarah by the hand, and when I did, I looked to the entrance of the alley and saw there were more giants with us. What I was shocked to see was that the rest of the people who had entered the alley weren't there anymore. Instead, all that remained were piles of flesh. I turned around and crossed the threshold into the building. Then I heard Sarah scream.
Phil!
I snapped my head to look at the doorway. There was Phil inside, but he was being dragged by a dark black hand which had gotten a hold of his leg. He kicked it and hit it with his fists, but it wouldn't let go. Immediately, I ran up to him. I pulled and pulled, but my strength was irrelevant to the strength of the giant, and instead, I was only being dragged.
Let go,
a voice said. I looked around to see who said it. Everywhere, anywhere except Phil. I knew Phil had said it, but I didn't want to accept he did.
Let me go, please.
Finally, I looked into his eyes and saw no fear, no terror, no hatred. He was calm.
Let go.
I did. Sarah and I didn't say anything as we climbed the stairs of the building. We looked around for a bit, and it seemed there was no one inside. They must have fled the building like we did. We eventually climbed the stairs to the roof, which was about 10 stories up. Then we looked into the street. The giants by now had long passed the building, at least those in the front. But I was amazed, shocked, horrified to see the long parade of giants continued down, and down the streets where we originally were. There had to be hundreds, maybe thousands, marching. All of them just walking forward, as if this were an everyday occurrence. Then I looked up off the street and looked across the horizon. It was happening everywhere. I saw in the distance plumes of smoke which came from fires, and long distant screams, and the occasional sound of bone. It's been about an hour since it began. Sarah and I are currently on the rooftop of the building we entered. I wrote this in a journal I had in my backpack. There was only a couple pages left since most were already torn out. So, since it will be of no use to me anymore, I will leave it here. I hope my questions will be answered soon, but for now, Sarah and I must leave. We know we can't stay here on the roof, so we will go inside the building to try to find supplies. The parade in the streets has long since died down, though there is the occasional one that walks down, most likely searching for any survivor who thought it was now safe to come out. The strangest thing is the military is here. A helicopter went over as I was halfway through writing this. Sarah and I jumped up and down, screaming, trying to get their attention. However, their light passed over us, and they simply flew by. They must know we're here, and they must come and help us. But for now, we are on our own. All right, I'm almost out of space. Hopefully I'm able to make it, and maybe I'd be able to see you, who's reading this, in person.